Chapter 3. Because mobile phones are highly personal items, i.e., they go with us everywhere and often are in constant contact with our bodies, many critics of wireless advertising, as well as advertisers themselves, are concerned that unwanted messages represent an invasion of privacy. Feeling invaded, recipients of undesired advertisements may immediately delete the intruding item and hold negative feelings toward the offending advertiser. In addition to privacy invasion, others are skeptical about wireless advertising's future on the grounds that advertising is antithetical to the reasons that people own mobile phones in the first place. The argument, in other words, is that people own mobile phones for reasons of enhancing time utilization and increasing work-related productivity while away from the workplace or home, and the last thing they want while using these devices is to receive unwanted, interrupting advertising messages. Exercise 1. Marine debris affects animals through ingesting it or getting entangled in it. It is estimated that up to 100,000 marine animals, including endangered species, are killed each year by marine debris. Very serious effects happen when marine animals become entangled in debris, such as fishing line and six-pack rings. Birds get fishing line entangled around their legs, which get injured and may be lost. Large amounts of plastic debris have been found in the habitat of endangered Hawaiian monk seals, including in areas that serve as nurseries. Entanglement in plastic debris has led to injury and deaths in endangered stellar sea lions, with packing bands the most common entangling material. Hatchling sea turtles run down the beach to the ocean, a critical phase in their life cycle. Debris can be a major impediment if they get entangled in fishing nets or trapped in containers such as plastic cups and open canisters. Marine debris is an aspect of habitat quality for nesting sites and may help explain declines in turtle nest numbers on certain beaches. Exercise 2. Regulations covering scientific experiments on human subjects are stringent. Subjects must give their informed written consent, and experimenters must submit their proposed experiments to rigorous scrutiny by overseeing bodies. Scientists who experiment on themselves can, functionally if not legally, avoid the restrictions associated with experimenting on other people. They can also sidestep most of the ethical issues involved. Nobody, presumably, is more aware of an experiment's potential hazards than the scientist who devised it. Nonetheless, experimenting on oneself remains deeply problematic. One obvious drawback is the danger involved. Knowing that it exists does nothing to reduce it. A less obvious drawback is the limited range of data that the experiment can generate. Human anatomy and physiology vary, in small but significant ways, according to gender, age, lifestyle, and other factors. Experimental results derived from a single subject are, therefore, of limited value. There is no way to know whether the subject's responses are typical or atypical of the responses of humans as a group. Exercise 3. In many schools, the art program traditionally has been viewed as a particularly favorable setting for educating students with special needs. In art classes, children are able to interact with such materials as paint or clay in direct response to their senses of sight, sound, smell, and touch. The materials of art are sensory, concrete, and manipulable in direct ways that are unique within the school curriculum. All the senses can be brought into interaction, providing opportunities to adapt art-making activities for students who have some sensory or mobility impairment. For example, children with visual impairment can form expressive objects with clay. Children with hearing impairment can visually observe a demonstration of color mixing with paint and try the process with immediately verifiable results. And children with motor disabilities can work with finger paints or with large brushes for painting. Used to remotely observe the temperature of stars and planets are now being used to help surgeons map brain tumors. charge-coupled device chip technologies stemming from the Hubble telescope have greatly furthered breast cancer detection techniques, allowing breast tissue to be imaged more clearly and efficiently, thus increasing resolution so as to be able to distinguish between malignant and benign tumors without resorting to surgical biopsy. Moreover, the procedure is 10 times cheaper than a surgical biopsy and greatly reduces the pain, scarring, radiation exposure, and time associated with surgical biopsies. Chapter 4. As the health of the social body began to change, hospitals became the primary institutions to care for the sick and monitor the passage from life to death. The dramatic rise in the number of hospitals across the country and their increasing control over the health of the nation contributed to the separation of death from everyday life. As doctors achieved professional dominance in the practice of medicine in the early decades of the 20th century, hospitals emerged as the principal site for the diagnosis and treatment of patients. In the words of one social historian, whereas doctors came to patients in the 1870s, by the 1920s, patients increasingly came to doctors. Over this time span, the American hospital changed in size and clientele. An 1873 survey counted 178 hospitals, about 50 of which were institutions for the mentally ill. A 1923 tabulation listed 6,830, or an increase of about 3,800%. While this change was most dramatic in the urban landscape, it also occurred gradually in rural areas. It should be no surprise that one consequence was an increase in the number of deaths away from home, the traditional place for end-of-life scenarios. Exercise 1. The way in which people shape landscapes often reflects the dominant culture. In a highly commercialized setting, such as the United States, it is not surprising that many landscapes are seen as commodities. In other words, they are valued because of their market potential. Residents develop an identity in part based on how the landscape can generate income for the community. This process involves more than the conversion of the natural elements into commodities. The landscape itself, including the people and their sense of self, takes on the form of a commodity. Over time, the landscape identity can evolve into a sort of logo that can be used to sell the stories of the landscape. Thus, California's wine country, Florida's Sun Coast, or South Dakota's Badlands shape how both outsiders and residents perceive a place, and these labels build a set of expectations associated with the culture of those who live there. Exercise 2. There are multiple views of the learner in theories of cognition, just as there are multiple theories of the nature of art. Some portray the learner as a lone individual, trying to make sense of a work of art or, for that matter, the world. Others picture learners as living within a social or cultural context from which knowledge derives its meaning. Such different views of the learner have consequences for teaching the arts. At the same time, if works of art are to be understood in terms of their social and cultural origins and purposes, then it would make sense to integrate the knowledge of the artwork into those subjects, such as the social studies or history, where knowledge of the culture and society is collaterally provided. But if works of art are thought of as autonomous structures whose meaning is set by the artist, where there is one objective or right interpretation, independent of its social context, then it might make more sense to pair this conception of art with the view of the learner as a lone individual. Exercise 3. You may resist the notion that music, which you think should be free to express emotion, is best thought of as rule-governed behavior. But rules govern all meaningful human cultural behavior in just this way. The point is not that musical performance is predetermined by rules, but that it proceeds according to them. In this view, music is like a game or a conversation. Without rules, we could not have a game, and without agreement about what words are, what they mean, and how they are used, we could not hold a meaningful conversation. Nonetheless, just as meaningful conversations can express emotion, so meaningful music can express it as well, though not, of course, in exactly the same way. Further, if a listener does not understand the rules, he or she can understand neither the intention of the composer or musician nor the music's structure. Exercise 4. Since the 19th century, economics has borne the dishonorable name of the dismal science. Some people think economics is called the dismal science because it's a dry and difficult subject. Others think it's because economics tackles depressing topics such as poverty, crime, war, taxes, inflation, and economic collapse. The cheerless nickname has been attributed by some to the Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle, who reportedly coined the term when discussing economist Thomas Malthus's prediction that one day population growth would outstrip food production and cause widespread famine. It's true that Carlyle wrote about Malthus on occasion, but Carlyle's negative characterization of economics, in fact, appears in an article that he wrote about slavery in the West Indies, not in any of his writings about Malthus. And as it turns out, Carlyle delivered his insults to economics simply because the free market economists of his time did not support his pro-slavery views. So, in the end, economics earned its less than auspicious nickname for being on what most would agree was the right side of history.